Hi there, this is Mr. Kim's class. Today we are going to look at one trigonometric question which is very similar to your internal assessment at level 3. A typical sine curve equation looks like this: y equals a sine b x plus c plus d. In this equation, a represents the amplitude, b represents the frequency. The b itself is not the period, but we can calculate the period very easily by using b value. Period is 2 pi over b. And c is horizontal translation, which means the sine curve shifts to the left or to the right. And d value means the vertical translation. The curve moves up and down by d value. Let's look at one typical sine curve or cosine curve. Sine curve and cosine curve are very similar to each other. Now, as you see here, the yellow arrow represents the amplitude. Amplitude is the half of the difference between the maximum and minimum value. And this blue arrow represents the period. Period is, in this graph, is 2 pi. Let's look at one example question. Now, I've got here one question, and this question is very similar to your internal assessment. Okay, the question is: the high tide at Piha is 4.6 meters at 10 a.m. and the low tide is 2.1 meters at 4:15 p.m. The question is: form an equation based on times since midnight to model the tide and find one time when the water is 3 meters deep. So there are two questions in this question. From this information given, we can find the period, because the period will be used several times later. Let's find out the period. The time between high and low tide is 6 hours and 15 minutes. Then we get this value from this 4:15 minus 10 a.m. Okay, and the time taken between high tide and low tide is the half of the period, because period should be the time taken from high tide to the next high tide. So we multiply by 2. So we get 12 hours 30 minutes. That's the period. Or we can express it 12.5 hours or 12 and a half hours. Okay, that's the period. Now let's find out the a value. A is amplitude. We can find the a value: maximum minus minimum divided by 2. So 1.25 meters is the a value. And v value is the frequency. This frequency we can find 2 pi over period, so 2 pi over 12.5 hours. So we change this 12.5 hours into whole number. It becomes 25 hours for the denominator, and numerator becomes 4 pi. And c value is the horizontal translation. So we can find this: negative time to maximum minus a quarter over period, which is negative 6.875. And d value is found by maximum plus minimum divided by 2, which is 3.35 meters. Now we've got all information to form this equation. So the equation is this. Okay. Now a value, we use this value, and b is this one, and c, horizontal translation, and vertical translation, is this value. Now since we have found the equation, now next let's try to draw the sine curve. This is the equation, and when we draw the curve should look like this. And this arrow represents the difference between maximum and minimum, and the amplitude is just half of this difference. And this is the period, which is 12.5 hours. And be careful that this 4 pi over 25 is not the period. Okay, and this is horizontal translation, which is negative of negative 6.875. So if we see a negative here in front of the figures, then the curve shifts to the right side. Actually, a standard sine curve starts from zero value here, so it is same as the origin of the standard sine curve shift to the right side by this value. Okay, and this is vertical translation of the sine curve. Now let's move on to the second question. Second question is, find out one time when the water is 3 meters deep. Now since we have formed the equation, and this is very simple and straightforward, we substitute 3 for y value here, and then we solve this sine equation. Now, at this point, I assume that all of you are very familiar with finding out the general solution of the trigonometric questions. So I just skip the process of finding out the general solution. So as you know, there are more than one answers for the value of t. Okay? But be careful at this point. I have taught several years, but every year I found some students make mistakes like this. If you find this 1.19, and some students write this 1 hour and 90 minutes, that's a very small mistake, but you don't get the full mark if you write down 1 hour 90 minutes. This is not the minute, this is the hour, so leave as it is as our unit. Okay, so 18.81 hours. That's not the same as 18 hours and 81 minutes. Okay, now this question is very similar to your internal assessment, and also this is the major part of the internal assessment process. I wish good luck to you. Thank you.